21 years ago, an event took place that challenged our collective sanity. September 11th was a crime on a global scale, but it was never investigated properly. Had that been done, it would have begun with examining the scene of the crime, in this case, the plane-shaped holes. It is that evidence that can lead directly to the most likely cause and the most likely suspects, the people with the means, motive, and opportunity to commit the crime. Newton's third law of motion states, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Equal and opposite reactions tell me this car was struck from the front and this car was struck from the side. Any kid who has ever run a stick against a picket fence can attest that whatever bent these columns struck from the side as well. You don't need a physicist to explain it. A generation ago, on September 11th, 2001, the mass media broadcast footage of a jet flying through a steel building. This is the Hetzarkani footage, which was broadcast on CNN. By freezing the footage, you can see the wings have entered the building, but there is no damage to the walls. This half-in, half-out plane is evidence of a composite video. They overlaid a plane onto the live video of the explosion to accomplish the ruse. Government-funded scientists have written extensively about how what was broadcast on that fateful day depicted a real event, but few addressed the physical evidence of the impact holes, and those that did admitted in their own reports that they were just guessing. They didn't actually prove anything. For example, this is a clip from a video produced by Purdue University. Purdue calls it an accurate visualization of Flight 11 as it cut through the exterior walls of the North Tower. Even the wing tips slid like butter through the steel. Severed was the term used by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. But when compared with the physical evidence, it's obvious the wingtips did not penetrate. The videos of the jet impacts, Purdue's visualization, and indeed the entire official story are not consistent with reality. At the point of impact, the columns were half-inch thick steel that measured 14 inches wide. Using the 14-inch columns as a gauge, apparently something much smaller than 14 inches wide collided with this column here. Whatever it was not nearly as big or as dense as that which gouged and sharply bent these columns over here. What did this was a lot closer to 14 inches than what did that. The columns were steel boxes, the sides of which protruded past the face. It is these protruding sides that are sharply bent to the right here, with the column face flattened between them. But this column wasn't struck so hard that the aluminum sheeting that covered it was knocked off or cut in half like these were. It was only whacked hard enough to dent it and pop out the bottom at the seam. The cladding was thin aluminum sheeting installed in 12-foot sections with the seams near floor level. This is a wingtip from a 767. We are to believe that this wingtip was only massive enough to dent this aluminum sheeting here, but a few feet away it was massive enough to gouge and bend steel in a completely different direction than the wing was traveling. Furthermore, if we believe the TV and Purdue University, then with the 30-degree sweep of the wings, the left wings would have impacted the columns on the right corners. And if the aluminum wing was somehow able to slice through the sharp steel of the World Trade Center, the damage would be consistent with it. The columns would be dented on the right and pushed south. But the evidence shows they were dented on the left and bent sharply to the west. But that's just the North Tower. Compared to the North Tower hole, there are very few photos available of the South Tower hole, probably because it's so incriminating. As with the North Tower, there was lightly damaged aluminum sheeting and progressively worse damaged steel, and on the ninth column, an inward blasting hole. But the smoking gun is this lone, still-standing piece of aluminum cladding. Remember, the aluminum sheeting wrapped the steel on three sides. The only way to explain this damage is with something impacting the column from the side, cutting through it, and exiting the other side. It gouged through the sides and face of the column, but passed behind the sheeting that covered the column, pushing it outwards as it went. Right here is all the proof anyone needs to know the official story is impossible. and all the videos of the plane crashes are fraudulent. This explains why, even though it was Flight 175 that was allegedly captured from multiple angles on live television, Purdue used Flight 11 for their model. Holy shit! But faking the videos was the easy part. The hard part was that something still had to cut the holes in the towers. For that, there were limited choices. Artillery isn't accurate enough for the task, and its capabilities don't match the physical evidence. As can be seen in these photos from World War II, it would be quite recognizable on the walls of the World Trade Center. It's too big and too powerful to account for the dented aluminum sheeting, and too small and too powerful to account for the bent steel. Artillery doesn't fit. Damage from directed energy weapons, such as lasers, particle beams, and microwaves, is not at all consistent with the damage to the towers and can be eliminated as an option. The same goes for explosives. If explosives can be used to mimic the lateral impact of small projectiles, then they can be used to mimic the head-on impact of large jets. But they didn't do that. For this reason, even if precision munitions or secret technologies do exist that can cause this damage, to use them to contradict their own story makes no sense. What does make sense is this evidence indicates exactly what it appears to indicate, and it is so damning to the official story that the only way to deal with it is to ignore it completely. Evidently, a projectile that was at once small and flimsy in some areas, but massive and dense in other areas, struck at an oblique angle of attack, causing progressively worse damage to the columns the deeper into the tower it traveled. There really is only one option. Both towers show almost identical left-to-right damage in the same place, the left wingtips. 8 progressively worse damaged columns, followed by an inward blasting hole, which was nowhere near where the jet engines would have impacted. Only kinetic weapons, such as bunker-busting cruise missiles, are of the right size and capability to account for both the lightly damaged aluminum sheeting and the gouged and bent steel. They also carry explosives that can account for that inward blasting hole. Most people immediately discount missiles as an option because they assume thousands of people would have seen them and would have reported them to the authorities. This is a circular argument because if missiles were used, then they would have been launched by the authorities the witnesses would have reported them to. There may well have been thousands of witnesses to missiles, but why would the authorities tell us about them when they were selling us a terrorist attack? Even so, early on, some witnesses did report seeing and hearing missiles.
Some people said they thought they saw a missile. Well, I don't know how people could differentiate, but we might keep open the possibility that this was a missile attack on these buildings.
And at about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, there was a loud sound that I can only describe as it sounded like a missile, not an airplane.
But for a clue as to what the witnesses might have seen, here's a flyby of a Tomahawk missile in Iraq. The photographer was prepared for this flyby, but not so the people in Manhattan, who would no doubt be not expecting to see cruise missiles. In the canyons of the city, distracted by the hustle and bustle around them, who would be looking at the sky? And even if they did glance up and see a cruise missile fly by 1,000 feet above them, would it have been anything other than a blur? So what kind of missile could do the deed? AGM-86D missile warheads are about 14 inches wide and weigh 1,200 pounds. They are big, powerful missiles that have been around for decades. The smaller AGM-158, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, or JSAM, looks like a plane, and in 2001 no one had ever seen one before. But if they did, it could easily have been mistaken for a small white plane. JSAMs were being produced in 2001 for testing and for the pilot production models, but they were not in the military's inventory, and mass production didn't begin until December of 2001, giving the authorities plausible deniability. But JSAMs used off-the-shelf technology from other tried-and-true missile systems, so there is no question that technology existed at the time. They looked like planes, They're stealthy, they have waypoint capabilities that enable them to fly in formation, and with planted targeting beacons, their margin of error would be next to zero. For perspective on the capabilities of the warhead, this is an excerpt from the JSAM missile warhead test from 1998. After experiencing shock loads as high as 12,000 Gs, there was no deformation of the casing, and the fuse timing delay performed to the millisecond. The warhead struck the thick, reinforced concrete target, penetrated through it, and traveled another half-mile downrange. The clean exit hole it left indicates that it maintained the desired straight trajectory while traversing the thick target. If it wasn't a JSAM, it was something similar. The most efficient way to hit parallel columns is from the side. Otherwise, if they were targeted perpendicularly, they would at best hit one column and possibly pass between two columns. Only by targeting them from the side could they ensure they could hit multiple columns with one missile. But in doing so, they left incriminating evidence. At a shallow trajectory, it would be the wing of the missile that impacted first, which is why the aluminum sheeting at the far left is only scored and dented, but a few feet to the right, where the warhead struck, the steel is gouged and bent. Only missiles can account for the physical evidence at the scene of the crime, the means, as it were. The motive was to terrify the public into supporting long-planned aggressive wars while destroying the white elephant known as the World Trade Center. The opportunity was at any time they pleased, but they chose September 11th, 2001. Who are they? Well, who had the means, motive, and opportunity? Who controls the U.S. airspace? Who controls the U.S. missile arsenal? Who controls the media? Who spent 2 decades invading, looting, and occupying the Muslim world? Obviously, 9/11 was run from the pinnacle of American power, but it wasn't just an American operation. The U.S. government would never have attempted such a hoax without first ensuring the enemy nations that supposedly have every reason for doing so wouldn't blow the whistle on them. Surely the critical thinkers, military minds, and scientists of China, Russia, and Iran know that in the real world, mostly hollow aluminum jets do not slice through steel skyscrapers. They would be the first people to recognize missile damage when they saw it. They would also know that if the leaders of all the world's governments, media, military, and academia were proclaiming planes did do it, then they would have no place to turn even if they wanted to blow the whistle. This evidence is ignored because it exposes the fact that the leaders of the world are colluding in a colossal lie. And if they would lie about something like 9/11, what would they not lie about? According to the damage evidence and according to the laws of physics, the plane-shaped holes were cut with multiple cruise missiles launched in broad daylight. How the videos of the jets were faked is irrelevant. The physical evidence alone is enough to prove they're fraudulent. But because most people will believe the television over their common sense, in my next video I'll demonstrate how it was accomplished. Thanks for watching.